Loving this, by the way.
Yeah, great. Very happy.
Hi everyone, welcome to Poetology. Today we have an interview with the lovely Serge Neptune, the author of this pamphlet, These Queer Merboys, which I recommended in my last video. We talk about what it's like to navigate the poetry world as a queer, immigrant, working class poet, and we also discuss the writing process. I hope you enjoy the interview. I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, Serge. Thank you so much for accepting to do this interview with me today.
Hi, thank you so much for asking me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So I read your pamphlet a while ago. You even drew that amazing merman on the first page, which the camera never really catches. Okay, this is not bad, actually. It's super lovely. And I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit more about, well, the pamphlet, but also about how you write and your process, and a bit more about like queer poetry and other things that are of concern or interest to you. So my first question was, you describe yourself as a queer working class poet and an immigrant. Could you say a bit more about these identities and how they come together in your writing?
I don't think they come together in any specific way other than the fact that the poetry is a product of my own mind. And I do think, if you're a working class poet, however your poetry will look, it will be working class poetry. If you're a queer poet, however your poetry will look, it will be queer poetry automatically. And so I don't think there's a specific way that would necessarily transpire in the poetry. Of course, I do talk about queer subjects quite a lot. So sometimes it's more evident, sometimes it's less evident, but my poetry, whatever the subject, does remain, in my opinion, queer poetry. Yeah, I think especially when straight middle class editors look at queer poetry, they wanted to look a bit stereotyped, and it's been the case in the past that I've had poems accepted in a magazine because it was just like a coming out story, in the most basic way, maybe. But it's just queerness and queer poetry have so many, there's so many different sides to it that honestly, there's not one way to do it, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think sometimes we pay more attention to these things from the outside, just trying to tag someone's work in some ways, rather than from the inside, seeing how it is tackled in the poetry, especially when the poetry goes away from the stereotypical models you just mentioned.
Yeah, I think those labels, queer and working class and immigrant, are more part of my trying to navigate the poetry world rather than the poetry itself. Because the poetry world, whether we like to admit it or not, is a place of privileged people. Very often, there's mostly people from the middle classes and mostly straight people. So it can be difficult to navigate all of this as a queer person. It can be difficult to navigate it as a working class person and as an immigrant. For some people, it's still hard to accept that you could write poetry in the English language, even though English is not your first language. And I think such a place like Harana, founded by Kostya Tsolakis and Roman Ante, is a testament to the opposite, the fact that not only that kind of poetry is possible in those conditions, but it thrives. The language evolves, it's not static.
Yeah, I often get that question myself. I have enough of an accent that people often figure it out anyway. But yeah, they often ask me, so you also write in French? And when I say I don't, they're very surprised that I don't do that. And yeah, it's just an expectation that I must be writing in French. And it's just that to me, it comes in English because I function in that language most of the time. And it's something that I've developed and I read a lot in English. So yeah, that's something that people always assume.
I think so. It's always hard to juggle people's expectations. And, you know, when you're a foreigner, especially when you're a foreigner, I feel you are you're always stereotyped, and most often than not, you either become you're either mocked or in a risible way, or you are considered a terrorist if you're not white usually. And so you're always other for them. And I think it's important to remember that the language is, as I said before, it's not static. The language evolves, and the language evolved in the past because of contribution from people from other countries at times. And poets poets writing in a language that's not their native language, it's not anything new. Let's think about Celan, was Romanian, but he wrote in German. Mandelstam, who's was born in Holland, but he wrote in Russian. So it is not the first time this happened. But also, let's think about somebody like Vani Cabildeo from the Caribbean. I mean, just writing in English like any other poet. So it's not uncommon. It's happened before. And I think, as I said before, these are the times when language evolves and thrives.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for sharing these thoughts. So thinking of your pamphlet now, This Queer Mermen is, I thought, a brilliant and really moving pamphlet. And the imagery is often raw. And then there is a lot of transformation that occurs within the poems, but also within the pamphlet as a whole. And it tends to come with a lot of pain. So I was curious about how you found writing the collection and whether some of these affects come into play, or what are the affects that you experience as you write?
That's such a big question, isn't it? Honestly, I don't really have a process, and it's very messy for me. And I do, you know, sometimes some poems come out very easily, and some poems are just like a labor of years. And so it's just really hard for me to pin down a specific process of how the poems in that pamphlet came to be. But yeah, I mean, the merman, the thing that was a constant, I think, was that I really believed in this idea of the merman. Like, I could not figure out why, but I knew it was an idea that would bring me somewhere, that would produce some quality work, and also, you know, produce some personal work. Because I think, you know, even if people don't know who I am exactly, but they know I'm the poet that writes with a merman and stuff like that. So I think it was also a way for me to be unique in a way. Again, the writing process is really messy. I think the interesting thing, I will say this about the merman, about the merman poems, is that it wasn't clear. I had the idea for this project, but it wasn't very clear from the very beginning what I was writing about, because the poems are not about mermen simply. The poems are about, you know, mermen subjects, so queer subjects of different kinds. And I think it became clearer to me that my work is mostly about the transformative nature of queerness, and how society breaks us time and time again. And time again, we have to, as queer people, refashion ourselves in a new identities, or simply rebuild ourselves in order to go on living. And so I think that became clear with me in time, which I think it's bizarre, because maybe you should think about that at the beginning. But no, it became clear to me out later. But yes, I think the merman became a vessel for me to talk about such subjects, and painful things, and like abuse, and sexual harassment and things like that are present in the LGBTQ+ community.
And it's such an apt image for queerness, in a way, being taken out of your element and brought up in a world in which you can never really quite fit, and that is quite painful for you to adapt to. And that works really, really well.
Thank you.
What keeps you inspired to write poetry, to work on this? What draws you to it?
I always say just kidding, I always say spite, because I want to prove to other people I can do it, and all the people that didn't believe in me, I just want to tell them I can do it. But I don't know, it's just a love for language. It's just a love for language, and reconnecting to what we were saying at the beginning. I think if language is not really your first if English is not really your first language, I think it's an interesting perspective to look at it from the outside. Because I think poetry is not necessarily written the way people would speak normally, and I think if language is not your first language, I believe you're at a point advantage, because you can look at the language from the outside, bring in your own perspective, maybe mix the rhythms of your own language with the poems you're writing in English language. And so I think so many interesting possibilities just open up for you, in a way. So the love for language is what mainly keeps me writing, especially because writing itself is a kind of torture, and sometimes you just hate it. And there's that one poem that's not getting it right yet, and you are still fiddling with it, and you don't know what to change anymore. So yeah, it's a bittersweet relationship, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. And as writers who come from marginalized positions, in some ways, you touched upon it a little earlier, like how it is for us to navigate the poetry world and how you've experienced it. How do you think we can claim a place in contemporary poetry, and what are some of the obstacles that we commonly encounter, but also what are some of our strengths?
Well, our strengths are just being ourselves. Just being ourselves, this is our biggest strength. If you keep your personality and you just, everything that you are can come to your advantage. And I think we need to claim it. This is mine. There's a space for me too here. You are not going to exclude me. And when you do that, sometimes you are perceived as a bit presumptuous, or a bit, like you should maybe be humble a bit. But I'm also a bit like, why? I can do this. And there's no reason why my writing shouldn't be published. There's no reason why my books should not be out there. I think it's also about giving yourself permission, because very often I feel we are told, you are a foreigner, you have to stick to your own place, like write in your own language or stay in your own country, so go back to your country. All those things I think are part of the mentality sometimes of British people. Like there's a sense, because they're an insular people, there's a sense of excluding others sometimes, or at least that's my perception. And I do think sometimes just putting your foot down and saying, there's place for me here, there's space for me here, and you should not deny me that. I think that's the best thing to do. And it all starts again with giving yourself permission.
Yeah, that's a great point about giving yourself the right to actually claim that space, because there's no reason why there shouldn't be any place for us.
I'm just noticing how on my camera it looks like my bookcase is going like that.
Oh yeah, it does look slightly slanted.
Yes,
so
I know.
So it's not slanted. That's good news.
It's one of those bookcases you can sort of put together yourself. I ordered it on Amazon, and it basically it does fall down at times, so I hope it's not going to fall on me. But yeah, it's difficult to keep it straight, which again, just fit me.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Could you read us one of your poems?
Yes. I really like this poem, so I'm going to read this one. There's a tank at the London Aquarium near the sharks, filled with mermen, and people observe with their mouths wide open how the mermen flex their tails and plunge. Such movements, such colours, such gleaming scales like sequins on a ball gown refracting light. Hollywood smiles and giddy faces, the agility they jump and glide with, and how they carry themselves, with seaweed and seashells around their necks and arms. The same glamour stage stars wear necklaces and feather boas with. And you can afford to stay too close to the glass, as the mermen are not threatening and the audience watching is really entertained. Look, now a merman offers another a flower as if they're courting, and they look into each other's eyes and smile and take each other's hand. It's almost like real life, says Amanda. Hannah and Will's enchanted faces shine with stupor. They have just bought their first house in Buckinghamshire and come here to celebrate, while Sharon, who has been crying all night and just met with Kate, and Kate asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" But now they both laugh and look upwards, the mermen splashing so hard, the water sprinkles on Kit's faces. A family from Norwich laughs so hard, and Billy just arrived as he got distracted by the skate tank. Even Karen, who's found a 90s Tamagotchi in her attic and has been playing with it all day, has stopped playing and now joins the crowd with her snorting laughter. And in the afternoon, some Americans lost their way searching for the big squid, but they stayed and enjoyed the display. And in the end, the lights soften and the mermen prepare for sleep, and two mermen lie in each other's arms, their tails gently entwined in caduceus fashion, and the audience goes, "Aw," and thinks it's cute. Then everybody proceeds towards the exit.
Thanks. Thanks, it's amazing. I love that line that starts with how they carry themselves. And how they carry themselves. There's a sense of pride, even though they're being looked at as objects, they have a sense of themselves, like being like standing up proud.
Yes, yes. I love this poem because I think it's very it is very evident of what goes on in society sometimes, as in queer people are, you know, they are entertaining and they are fun and they are glamorous, but maybe they should not become like real part of society. So for some people, we're good enough as entertainer or as, you know, as something to look at from away, but we should not become too real. And I think that sometimes really happens in everyday society. Sometimes we become too real and maybe dangerous.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I was thinking again of the first topic we mentioned as well about languages and how people tend to naturalize their mother tongue. And I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I even agree with that, you know, the first language is the natural language. I think all languages are artificial and nobody is born speaking a language. And so they're all something that you've added onto, that you've just borrowed, that you've acculturated to. And that's true of your mother tongue as much as it is of other languages. And then some people will say, but you grew up in that language, so you have a special relationship to it. And that's true. But then you also develop a relationship with a new language and through experience, develop all kinds of effective responses to certain words and phrases and end up with a relationship that is just as strong to that language.
I absolutely agree 100%. What is a native speaker? What is a native speaker? And why should a native speaker only use that language? I mean, does it mean they have a complete mastery of the language? That's not the case very often. It means they're more used to it, but to become more used to it. You just have to speak it. You don't have to speak it from birth. And again, also when you talked about, the attachment to a language, that doesn't always happen. Not everyone has an attachment to the place or where we come from. And especially as queer people, very often we have to run away from places, and the places that welcomes us becomes our place. And I think that if you're a straight person, you give that for granted, that the place where you are born, that's the place you need to love. And if you're a queer person, I think that's more evident that that's not always the case. It's not always as easy as that. And I do think, sometimes you don't have a relationship with a place. We are born in randomly in the world. There's not a specific order. There's not a specific reason why you're born in a place, but other than your parents, but it's one of the tools in your box. You can use it if you want and show pride for your country of birth. And if you do feel pride for your country of birth, you should show it. But at the same time, if you do come from neglect and abuse and that country gave you nothing, like nothing, and that's the case with me, you can just burn bridges completely. And I feel I'm a bit of a glitch in the system, because I don't have a relationship with my country of birth. I don't speak the language of my country of birth by choice. I don't really have any of that because I do come from quite a lot of abuse, and the language itself is triggering. And sometimes it's hard for people to imagine how a language can be triggering, especially if it's your language of birth. I think it's interesting. I think, nothing's ever as easy as you're born there, you need to stay there. Who says? There's no rules. We're all making them up.
Yeah. And I also appreciate how English is less gendered comparatively to French, for example, and many other languages. So it's a lot easier as a non-binary person to navigate the English language. And I find it much trickier in French, where every adjective is gendered. Every adjective I use for myself has to be gendered. And there are fewer gender neutral alternatives to a lot of words. Not that English is great, but it is better in that respect.
That's very true. But I did see that some languages are starting to adapt.
Yeah.
I was speaking with my Swedish friend the other day, and she was, they're not there yet, but Swedish does have a sort of neutral alternative for non-binary people, and for people who choose to identify with neutral terms. So we're starting to see a change, I think, and I think that's important. We'll get there eventually, I think. There's only room for improvement.
So true. Yes. Okay. So thank you so much for the interview. It's been amazing to talk to you.
Well, thank you. It's been amazing to talk to you. I really love these questions.
You're welcome.
A big thank you again to Serge for this conversation, which I really enjoyed. I hope you liked it as much as I did. There will be a link down below for Serge's pamphlet. Please go and order a copy. And I will see you again very soon for another video. Bye!